Hey ladies! I am doing a discussion this afternoon because I know some of you are on different time zones than I am or whatever. Sometimes things just work differently for different people. So I don't imagine there being a ton of people on my discussion today just because I know many of you are at work. But again, don't worry if you don't catch the live event. If you watch this later, please feel free to participate if you need to. Today we're going to be just talking through the last few days of reading. So the last time I saw you was Sunday or Monday. Now I can't remember. But we're going to start in chapter 17 today of Isaiah and then move forward all the way to yesterday's reading, which is chapter 23. So hopefully you guys are enjoying your catch-up day. I encourage you not to take this day as a day where you're just gonna take it easy and not read the Bible. I encourage you to commune with God. Like I said, catch up if you need to, get ahead if you want to, or if you want to go back and just maybe answer some questions that you had before on some of the passages, I totally understand that. We're going to talk a little bit about history and what's going on in these chapters, but there is so much information. I just don't have the time to sit here with you today to tell you every single bit of the background story that's going on in these chapters that we've been reading. So if you need something to do today, if you feel like you've been doing a good job catching up, but you don't have a whole lot of questions, I would really encourage you to go back into the 2 Kings passages like 16 and 17 and 18 and kind of read what's going on or read some commentaries and see what's the backstory to each of these chapters we see in Isaiah. So today we're starting with chapter 17. Is that right? I think that's what it said. So anyways, I see a few of you guys are with me today, so that's exciting. Welcome. Chapter 17, we're going to jump into, this is called an oracle concerning Damascus. And if you missed my last live event, I explained an oracle is basically God talking to a prophet. So an oracle is a prophecy. So each of these, just think of them as a prophecy. Isaiah is, giving them, but these are straight from God. And each one of these chapters are dealing with a different civilization, a different country, a different culture group. So this one's talking about Damascus. And if any of you guys have been watching the news, you know Damascus is in Syria. And that is still the capital of Syria today. So lots of history in this area. So chapter 17 is about Syria. And just to give you a little bit of background information, Syria was not always a friend of the Jews. However, Ephraim, remember we've used that word Ephraim to describe the northern kingdom of Israel. Damascus and Israel have been kind of working together as allies to mess with Judah a little bit. Remember, Isaiah is talking to Judah throughout these beginning chapters. So the people of God in the northern kingdom have been aligning themselves with people that they shouldn't be with. So keep that in mind. This is kind of a weird thing. I was just reading a little bit about the history between Israel and Syria, which is extremely colorful. Like I said, if you enjoy seeing how things connect to ancient, scripture like this, and what's going on today in the Middle East, in that part of the world, the relationship between Syria and Israel is really interesting and, like I said, very colorful. They have been at each other's throats for a long time, where they've actually been fighting over certain parts of Israel, the land. Even still to this day, they're not very good friends. So I find it very interesting that this time period, part of Israel happens to be working together with their enemies, Syria, in order to wage war against the southern kingdom. So very interesting. I also wanted to give you a cross-reference, which is 2 Kings 16:9, which tells us that Syria does eventually get destroyed under King Ahaz. Not by King Ahaz, but they will see destruction. So chapter 17 is talking about Syria, and basically you're going to see the same things all throughout each of these chapters. These different cultures have pride issues. These different cultures have this feeling as though they are invincible, that nothing can conquer them, that they have all the money, they have wealth, they have fortune, they have armies, they have trade. There's all these different things that they are so proud of. And yet the Lord says, because you haven't chosen me, you're going to see destruction. Because again, we've been talking about how sin just never wins. It never wins. And like I said, if you ever have the chance to do your research, I know sometimes we can just dig and dig and dig in Isaiah, and we don't always have the time, because I think you can almost dig endlessly. But if you dig during this time period, you're going to find out a lot of information about what happened to these ancient civilizations. So very interesting. I'm looking at my section. So in verses 6 through 8, I noted that God is still extending mercy, particularly to these people. I'll read it for you. Gleanings will be left in it, and as when an olive tree is beaten, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruit tree, declares the Lord God of Israel. In that day man will look to his Maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. He will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, and he will not look on what his own fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. So these 3 verses are telling us that even though there's a lot of issues going on with this group of people, both Damascus and Ephraim, the northern kingdom of Israel, there are still going to be a select few that are righteous men. And verses 6 through 8 is saying that God's extending mercy to that small group of people. That's what it means by 2 or 3 berries are going to be left in the top of the tree when it gets beaten. So I'm still seeing a merciful God, even through destruction, even through judgment, even through I think God has every right to destroy these wicked people, and he still says, there's going to be those that do believe in me. Very good idea. Diana had a great idea. If you guys can see her comment, it's very interesting to go back and see where these civilizations lived. Most of them are very close to one another, and then of course over the years they have kind of changed a little bit here and there. So it's good to look up what it looked like during ancient time periods, because some of these civilizations are still around today. You guys would have recognized Egypt in chapter 19, which we still have a country named Egypt today. So yeah, that's a really good idea, just to give yourself a little visualization. Skipping forward to Cush in chapter 18, when I studied what Cush actually was, I got a lot of different ideas. So if you guys have any thoughts, or if you've read anything, chime in and tell me if you looked up where Cush is, and tell me what you found. I would love to hear from you. I've heard a few different answers there, and most commentators are a little vague. They're okay with it being a little vague. As far as all these prophecies go, this one is not quite as easy to pinpoint exactly which civilization this is, but even still in this section, doesn't matter where it's at, they've still got some major issues, just like the Syrians had in chapter 18. So we're seeing, again, the power of God and how helpless we as humans can be, especially when we are relying on our own strength and our own power to live life. So you see, again, this whole section is a lot of judgment. And I'm kind of moving through each of these sections, but they're all going to sound very similar. So I don't feel like we need to sit on every single one of them. Again, chapter 19 is Egypt. We know what civilization that is. They've had also a very colorful past. But we know, if you've studied anything from ancient Egypt, you know that they were once a great civilization. In fact, even today, they really are not, they really still are a pretty great civilization. But look at verse, where did I find that? Look at verse 1. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. I see a God who is holy and powerful and should strike fear in those that are looking into themselves for help. And we've had some good conversations over the past couple days about pride, that word pride, and how many of us struggle with that. And I find that I struggle the most with pride on the mountaintops. I don't always struggle with it quite so much when I'm hurting or when I'm in a trial, but when things are going well and when life seems to be working out well for me, when I feel blessed, I often let pride creep into my life. It's a terrible taskmaster, and he kind of shoves God out of the way and feeds you a lie that says that you are the reason why you are you. You're the reason why you do so well. You're the reason why you're succeeding at your workplace. You're the reason why your house looks so nice. You know, all these different lies that come in that say that God had nothing to do with the blessings that you've been given, that you worked hard for those and that you deserve that. Even our culture today tells us those lies, and pride can be such an issue in the world today. You know, believe in yourself and you can be you. You do whatever you want and you can make it. Well, the truth of the matter is that God's hand is in everything, and when I read through these passages, I'm reminded just how small I am and how literally I don't deserve a thing that I have. And I have no rights to myself. I don't deserve anything. I don't have any rights to anything. Everything that I've been blessed with has been given to me by my Father. And that's keeps you very humble. I wrote down an interesting quote. This was found in David Gusik's commentary. And he said, whenever pride is not broken by humility, it will have to be broken by justice. This was said by Bultema. And I found that quote really interesting because it's so true. You kind of have two chances really to work on pride. And we know that Proverbs has some great wisdom about pride going before a fall. And of course, chapter 17, 18, 19, even through 20, all the way through 23, we're seeing group after group of people that pride is getting in the way and they fall. And again, like I said, it's such an unstable and unsecure lifestyle, so we have to be very careful. I wanted to rewind really quick and tell you guys what I found about Cush, just in case you guys were wondering. So Cush, some people do believe that this is or have referred to Cush as ancient Egypt. However, commentators will tell you that since chapter 19 distinctly mentions the word Egypt, they're saying probably not. It's probably a different civilization in 18, a different group of people. So some of the options that I found, the two that I found were, it could be the Assyrians, which lived in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which were two rivers running through the Middle East, and you can still find those rivers today. Other people believe it was the ancient country of Ethiopia, which is near Egypt, which would make sense that Cush, that same region, Egypt, and then lower in the south, Ethiopia, that region may have had the other word called Cush. So either way, like I said, it really doesn't matter which group we're talking about. We just know they've got a problem, and they're going to see some serious problems. So Jody said Ethiopia. Ethiopia makes a little bit more sense to me just because like of what I said. I've heard of Cush most often being talked as ancient Egypt, and I know that Ethiopia is close to Egypt. Although the Tigris and Euphrates also are near to Egypt, but farther east. So if the Assyrians lived in that Arabian area, it very well could have been them. So either way, like I said, they've got a pride issue. Destruction is coming for sure. So very, very tough times for these people. As we move forward into your passages, you're going to see chapter 21 where we talk about Babylon. And Babylon is, again, we've heard of Babylon because if we remember, like, you know, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and all these people that lived under the Babylonian rule, and we know that they were a great, great nation, that they conquered a lot, that there was a beautiful garden that a Babylonian king created that was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. They had money, they had wealth, they had possessions, they had a great army. And yet, even still, like I said, the chapter title in my Bible says, Fallen, Fallen is Babylon. And reading that was very interesting to me because I have done some study on the ancient civilization of Babylon, and I do know the strength of who they were, and yet we live in a time period where there is no such thing as Babylon anymore. And so we know that they are done for. Remember that Babylon can also talk about the world. They kind of mentioned that there was a couple chapters ago where we were talking about that. Yeah, chapter 13, we were talking about the judgment of Babylon, where we mentioned Babylon was for real an ancient civilization, but it also represents basically anything that goes in rebellion against God. So the world, essentially. And there's going to be a day where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. We know that there will come a day when everyone will know that Christ is real, that God is real. So yeah, exactly what I said, Valerie. Perfect. So, Jody, I'm not sure what you're talking about with the desert of the sea. So I wasn't sure if you were still mentioning something about Ethiopia or if you were talking about Babylon. I wasn't sure, but you can clarify there. I'm gonna let you read what Kristen said about Isaiah chapter 22 and 23. From Babylon to Jerusalem, the problem was so very similar. The people think that they're self-sufficient. Their own pride has blinded their eyes to God's power and their own weakness. God's people have done this time and time again. The Lord longs for his people to return and seek him, but instead they try to do things in their own strength. And then she goes on to mention different sources of strength in kings and warriors and military power, while the God of the universe stands ready to deliver. So it's kind of silly to think that even we as God's people, even though we're Gentiles, do the same thing where we rely on everything but God to get us through situations. I'm so guilty of that, especially when I get into a tough situation and I still feel as though I can get myself out. I begin to ask questions to myself like, okay, what do I need to do next to correct the situation? Who do I need to call? You know, what are my next steps? Instead of getting on my knees and saying, you know, asking for help. So thanks, Jody. Babylon got it. So I am just as guilty as each of these places. And I know sometimes Isaiah can be really overwhelming just because there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of prophecy, so it feels like a lot of stories. But each time, and I did feel like, wow, so many oracles, so many, every chapter. But it was just drilling into my heart how binding pride can be in our lives. So this is something that, yes, I struggle with, but everybody seems to struggle with it, and it's so easy to get to that place. And there is nothing at the end of the road of pride except destruction. There's nothing there. And we all know that, but yet we struggle with that a little bit as well. Which would make sense that even what Valerie and I had said would make sense with what your commentary is saying, that Babylon would be also a good representation of the world. Anything or anyone that rebels against the deity of God, the deity of Christ, would become a wilderness. Yeah, so I would agree with that too. Lastly, in chapters 22 and then 23 kind of goes into the last of our oracles in this section, which is concerning Tyre and Sidon. And Tyre was the ancient Phoenician civilization, and again, a really famous, if you ever studied ancient history, you most likely have heard of the Phoenicians because they were the commanders of the sea. Their civilization lived right near the water, so they were in control of major harbors. There were lots of trade routes that went through this land, and they, needless to say, had a lot of money and a lot of wealth. And even in this oracle, look at verse 1. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste without house or harbor. It's important that we see house or harbor because, like I just mentioned, they were in control of the seas. These were merchants. Everything that was bought and purchased went through this area. So having a wasteful harbor, having a destroyed harbor, would mean destruction. I mean, just desolation for these people. Be still, O inhabitants of the coast. The merchants of Sidon who crossed the sea have filled you, and on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile. You were the merchants of the nations. You know, no doubt in my mind exactly who he's talking about here. And yet still destruction and waste to this group. Why? Because of rebellion, and again because of pride. When I was reading through these two chapters, I wrote down, God's people trust in themselves and others to conquer the land, to rule their people. We take a risk when we choose to trust in ourselves. God, on the other hand, is safe and secure. He is always the right choice. And I have to remember that my sinful flesh is going to tell me otherwise. So whenever, like I said, pride creeps into your heart, it does feel right because our flesh is sinful. However, it's so risky. And like I said a couple minutes ago, it only leads to destruction and waste. God is the only secure choice. I'm reading to you guys' comments. Yes, I find that really interesting too, Valerie. And I like that when I did a little bit of more of background reading, then I was reading that these were really the big time world powers of the day. So not only did he choose, like you mentioned, it feels like kind of the four corners of the known world at the time, but he was also mentioning countries who otherwise we as human beings, if we lived during that time, we would have never ever thought we would see the day that they would be gone. To put that into modern day talk, it would be like God writing about China and the US and maybe Great Britain, world major superpowers, all, being destroyed. Some of them have specific timelines when they're going to be destroyed. I believe it was Damascus, Syria, where they mentioned, I feel like I'm going to say that wrong, so let me check. I know there was one that said they would be destroyed in like 3 years. So if you guys caught that, you can tell me, but, maybe I didn't write it down. I felt like it was Syria, but I can't find that specific, verse. I'll probably find it as soon as I get off of here later. But anyways, I mean, to think that in 3 years' time, like China would be destroyed today would be crazy to me. And yet, like I said, there is no match for God's righteous, holy judgment that has to come on evil. So can I ask you guys a question? When you're reading through these chapters in Isaiah, what comes to mind as far as how can this apply to your life today? I mentioned that pride kept creeping into my study where I was so guilty of pride, and that just kept being kind of renewed in my heart every single day when I read. So pride is one, so you can't take that one, but what's something else the Lord was teaching you this week through your reading? And if you're not quite up to chapter 23, don't stress. I would still love to hear what God's still teaching you even in what you are reading. So just let me know what chapter you're on and what the Lord's been teaching you. I think it's good to be able to give ourselves some themes, to be able to keep our mind on track in these verses and in these chapters. So pride is really important to keep yourself on track. God is so powerful and he's so capable of anything. And I think it's easy for our brains, especially for reading this really shallowly, like trying to run through it, not journaling and not studying. We can see kind of a hateful God. But I'm reminded in the cross-reference of Ezekiel 33:11 says, "Say to them, as I live," this is God talking, "as I live, declares the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn back from your evil ways, for why will you die, O house of Israel?" So Jody just caught that right on the head. That's exactly the word I was going to say there. God does not take any pleasure in punishing the wicked. He doesn't. He rather wishes for us to, confess and repent and come to him and look to him for redemption and for us to accept his free gift of mercy. And so many people will go to their deathbeds not accepting that gift, many times because of pride, sometimes because of ignorance as well. But it's again, with these people, he's saying, you have a chance. You have a chance. If you guys would like another cross-reference, another great reference talking about that was Proverbs 24:17 and 18, which is talking about the Lord not being interested, not taking any pleasure out of, destroying his enemies, not taking any pleasure from that, destroying people that, choose wickedness over himself. That passage says, skipped a page. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and let not your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and be displeased and turn away his anger from him. I haven't done a whole lot of, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some sort of religion scholar, but when comparing other world religions to Christianity, that is one of the things that I feel sets Christianity apart. There is not a God on the other side of this book that delights in the blood of evil people, that takes pleasure in destroying countries or groups of peoples or civilizations. Our God, the one true God, is a God of mercy and a God of love. And like we've mentioned so many times before, even though he's holy and righteous and he has to punish sin, he does not take pleasure in that. And that's why he sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for us. That was a second chance for all of us, because each one of us have in our hearts said, no, I don't want to live a holy life. It's physically impossible for me to do that. And God knew that. He knew that from the beginning, from Adam and Eve, we would choose sin. In fact, we choose it over and over again. And he knows that he has to punish sin. And he still gave us a second way to get there through Christ, who was the only and perfect sacrifice. So Isaiah is really connecting the dots for me for the importance of Jesus. Not that I ever felt that he was unimportant, but in a whole new light, I feel this desperate, that's the perfect word, this desperate need for Jesus in my life. And it makes me so much more thankful for what I've been given, and it makes me so much more energetic and ready to tell others about what they can have as well. So that's all I have for you guys today on this section up until chapter 23. Let me know if you have any questions, or again, like I said, if you want to share what the Lord's been teaching you over these past couple chapters. I would love to hear from you. I think it helps us to get together and be able to talk through these things, because when you're learning on your own, there are times where you'll read something in Isaiah and you'll think, oh, I hope I'm on the right track. So just a reminder that we are here for you, and that if you have any questions or if something comes up and you feel like you would really love to just ask, but you're nervous to, don't hesitate. The ladies on here are so helpful and encouraging, and you just never know. There may be another person that has your same exact question. Valerie, I'm assuming you are talking about Ruth, who if you are, I'm assuming that you're connecting the dots to Moab and how she was a Moabitess woman. And Valerie mentions that she vowed to take on God and the one true God, even though she came from a civilization that was in ruin and had experienced destruction. I'm really glad you brought that up, because another really cool thought that I found about Tyre, which remember we mentioned was Phoenicia, the Phoenicians. I'm going to find it. But when you run over to Acts 21:4, now we're going into the life of Paul. So this is past Jesus. This is a long way back. He's landing there at Tyre. It says, when we had come in sight of Cyprus, leaving it on the left, we sailed to Syria and landed in Tyre. For there the ship was to unload its cargo. And having sought out the disciples, we stayed there for 7 days. And through the Spirit, they were telling Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. So what does that mean? That means that through the judgment of the people at Tyre, there was a shoot. Let's use that explanation. There was life in that destruction, and Christians, came out of that area. And so in these chapters, this is chapter 21, Paul finds himself in Tyre, and again, this is hundreds of years after Isaiah was written, and he finds a group of Christians there that he's able to talk with and stay with and just enjoy their company. So I find that even through destruction and death, God again finds a remnant there with this group of people. And how encouraging just to meet things like that. I'm reminded in other places of the world that that's happening right now. In Muslim majority countries like Syria, for example, another place, we're seeing a lot of Christians over there that are accepting God's free gift. China, I know, is having another underground movement of Christians in that area. Places where they get in trouble for having a Bible. Even in China, don't let the media tell you that China is this incredibly wonderful capitalistic place. There's still bad things happening there. even though maybe they aren't broadcast to the world, all those things. So in a place of great tyranny or great persecution, some of these places, God is still bringing hope to those people, and his word is still going out even to those places. How encouraging. Also a reminder for us to pray for our brothers and sisters in Christ, because they're everywhere. They're all over the world. So I wanted to let you guys see that. I'm glad you reminded me, Valerie. That's in Acts 21:4 if you're interested. A group of Christians that are blossoming right out of the destruction of Tyre. So really, really cool. All right, so that's all I got for today. So I hope that you enjoyed our talk. I hope it helped a little bit. And again, I would love to hear what the Lord is teaching you as well. So I hope you have an awesome Thursday, almost weekend, and I will see you in a few days.